Welcome to this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, a forum for retail leaders to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities.
This is Anil.
And this is Fabi, and each episode we invite some of the brightest minds in the industry to discuss the future of customer centricity, with topics ranging from the rise of e-commerce to brick-and-mortar operations, to omni-channel technology to retail culture, and how all of these elements come together to create customer-centric retailing. Today we have with us Ashley Merrill, founder and CEO of Lunya and an active supporter and investor in female entrepreneurship. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. Well, there's so much for us to talk to you about today, but just to start us off, can you walk us through kind of your career progression so far and ultimately what inspired you to found Lunya?
Sure. So I started, the concept of Lunya really came back in 2012. So it was a while ago. And it came because I really related to the gap, to be honest. I was wearing my husband's old clothes around the house and was looking for something to maybe feel more comfortable in, as well as confident that could help me sleep better. And so I actually was hunting for another company that would solve this problem. And when I realized there was a gap there, I realized there was an opportunity for me to jump in and see if I could solve that. And so that was really the impetus behind it.
Awesome. I love that. And I can actually really relate to that too, which is why I think your brand has been so successful with women. Your brand has had tremendous success, 200% year-over-year growth, which is a figure I think many retailers are really striving for right now, especially since the pandemic has been so challenging for the retail industry in particular. So when it comes to your brand, I'm curious what you think really differentiates you from the competition. There's so many sleepwear options out there to choose from. What draws a customer to your brand in particular?
Sure. Well, sleepwear is what we do. It's what we're focused on. So it's this thing that we have really spent a long time honing. What are the right materials? What are the right cuts? We're a brand that's not all about newness. We really focus on making best-in-class pieces. And so our pieces have really withstood the test of time, and they've been the product of lots of years of iteration. So that's a mindset about sleep that we're bringing to it, where we're creating really trustworthy products. So if you're looking for best-in-class sleepwear, we're the place to go. There are other people that make more novelty sleepwear that maybe, at checkout at J. Crew, you're going to throw some in your cart. There's definitely people like that, but that's more of like if you're, again, the novelty is the right word there. You're looking for something to kind of feel a specific, I just need to grab something. But if you're really looking for best in class and that product that has been engineered and designed in the way to, to support you how you sleep, that's really the mindset we're bringing to our sleepwear design.
So actually, what I'm wondering about is like in the fashion industry, we always talk about seasonality, 2 seasons, and then these all fast fashion came in and they are like, 6 weeks to 8 weeks collections coming in. Whereas what you have is, I believe, is independent of season, right? It's like in the home, you are like almost always you have the same temperature and atmospheric conditions. So how do you see your business? And you're still growing, which is great. So your customers must be loyal. They must once they get it. So tell me about how is your growth strategies working? How do you acquire and keep those customers so that you can still grow while you don't have to launch new products every 6 weeks or 6 months?
Sure. And I think there's just no getting around that you have to have an incredible product that people value. At the end of the day, it's funny because I read all of these stories about these breakaway success companies where, some overnight sort of magic happens. And I think those are great, but I do think those are anomalies. I think more businesses that reach good size are businesses that grow because people buy it once and want to buy it again, or they buy it and they love it so much they want to buy it for their friend or their mom or their, somebody else. And so for us, it really all comes back to making an incredible product. I hate to be so obvious in that way, but I think it's the thing it's easy to get away from. You can't get to the place where you're optimizing for cost so much that you're dumbing down your product and you're creating something that when they get it, they don't love it, because you're sending yourself on an forever customer acquisition loop. Whereas if in fact you really invest in retention and you invest in retention both through actual like marketing retention practices, but also from a product mindset. You can create something that is kind of building a lot on its own. And so I think for us, a lot of it is taking these great products that we built over time and making sure that people understand how that can be a great gift, or how they can build onto the pieces that they already have, and kind of helping them realize how we can kind of round out the offering. But I do think, while there may be other people that are coming on the market, part of it is just building a product that people trust. We are not a cheap product. It's an investment when you buy Lunya, but you're buying something that lasts a long time and that serves your purposes you need. Because, like we said earlier, both the beauty of the business is it's not super seasonal, but the challenge in that is that's a product that people are going to wear every single night. So they're looking for something that continues to serve them for a long period of time.
Wow, this is amazing. In fact, I can relate it in a certain way because coming from the engineering and technology background, what we do is we call as an iterative agile model where we keep evolving our product as we learn more from our customers. We keep improving our product because, again, those products are installed or used by our customers for a long time, like generally like 7 to 10 years. And similarly, like you're saying, is like the product evolves and the product sticks with the customers, so they have to love it. It cannot be bothering them day in day out. It's not something that you buy and then throw, but it's going to be sticking. So the product has to be high quality. It has to evolve with the customer needs, and as we learn about the customer, the product has to get better. And I believe that's where your return policy comes in also, because that's another channel for you to get more feedback from the customer, which would, I believe, feeds into your product development. Is that so?
Yes, and we actually take a lot of that return feedback into account, particularly on new products. So when we're getting returns, we're actually asking people. This is incredibly novel, but we do really rely on this. We're asking people to fill out their return reason, and we had to make sure that those return reasons are very actionable for us. If everybody's buying something and they respond that it's too small, we need to make adjustments on the next round of fit. So I do think one of those things is getting away from the I can't just have returns with no reason, or I can never iterate on it. And I can't have returns where I've got these sort of anecdotal type responses that I can't quantify, because look, every product's going to get some kind of a negative feedback from somebody that's saying something. And there has to be enough of a sample size to be, is this something I want to action? So it's helpful to kind of figure out how to turn feedback into something that's quantitative.
Wow, this is amazing. In fact, this is really the beauty of these modern age brands that are coming up, like your brand, right? That so much integrate the product development into the sales and all that and feedback loop. So you're collecting data about the customer, about your product, their feedback on how they like the product, what the return is, and that goes back into the product development. And I believe this is where I talk to a lot of retailers because we provide technology for them. And I see that, this is where the legacy retailers or legacy brands really struggle when competing with the modern brands like yours, because you have like much more control over your data, like your customers, your product data, how it is getting used, and all these things, which makes your brands like yours much more stronger and makes it harder for all these legacy brands that are mostly like designed ones, and then they kind of like have certain kind of way of seasonality, but like I don't think they are using so much of scientific methods and data to improve their products at the regular basis.
I think that's one of the challenges, honestly, of having an early stage business. Is it's you often just don't have access to the same level of data reporting, or honestly, if your customer base is so small, it's hard to even get an accurate sample size on feedback. And so, I think that's really the challenge. And this is why when I went into sleepwear, there was not a lot of competition. I don't recommend, I'm not a big fan of people going into super saturated industries and trying to build a business out of there. It'll be far more expensive, and the bar has been set really high. I went into sleepwear where there was very few people in sleepwear. And so, yeah, now the overall bar on being in sleepwear is much higher because there's people like me that are out there iterating on our products and creating a really high design bar level, which didn't exist, when I went in. And so that gave me an advantage. And I think every time entrepreneurs are going in and trying to figure out what is the industry to go in, unless you're willing to raise tons of money off the bat and be able to hire all the experts, it's just very hard to go in, you know, swinging 10 out of 10s on every product you make without, with, in these saturated fields. And if you can't, it's hard to hang.
Yeah, I love that piece of advice from you. And I think so many entrepreneurs out there right now, they really want to launch their own brand. They want to create, this great retail brand, but there's so much competition out there. And it can be hard to get that jumping off point where you just start. So I'm curious if you have any advice for specifically digitally native brands that are just starting out. And also, you started digitally native, but you do have a store presence now. So, what inspired that transition? What has that transition been like for you for maybe other digitally native brands that are looking to maybe make that change as well?
I think digitally native is an approach, but not a long term strategy. I don't think that um, it enabled us to get started where there was fewer headwinds. I actually don't think that exists for people that are moving into a digitally native marketplace today. And what I mean by that is when I started as a digitally native brand, I was in an atmosphere where buying on Facebook was affordable and I could easily spend against my acquisition needs. So now, with the iOS updates and Google's updates that it's making, it's harder to buy new users in this environment. So now you're facing headwinds that really didn't exist in the same way when I was, building a younger brand. And so again, these are things where it's like, at the end of the day, the world around us is changing all the time. And in retail, that's changing both in terms of distribution and I mean my supply chain is changing all the time. So it's just we're in a dynamic environment, and so from my standpoint, getting married to one distribution method feels risky, or even saying no. Like I wouldn't blanketly say no to any distribution method, though it's all changing as we go. And so to me, it's coming back to really understanding the value proposition that you're bringing. What is the product that you're creating? Whose problem are you solving? Being really clear on who. It's not just like, oh, I solve these things for all these people. It's like, no, I have a really clear customer identity, and this is who they are and how I reach them and what message speaks to them, and being really tight on that. And then being really flexible about your approach. It's like, cool, I want to reach women that are within this age range, this household income level, this set of interests. And now that I've determined that, I'm willing to reach them in these 10 different ways, that I can think of to try to kind of get in front of them. So I moved from being digital primarily, and I started at digital. Let's put it this way: I started in digital before there was so many businesses in digital, and I started there because being in sleeper, being in an industry that really didn't have much industry knowledge behind it, I knew I was going to have a huge customer education hurdle. I had to educate this customer who really wasn't buying sleepwear currently on the value of buying sleepwear. And I knew my product wasn't cheap. So I knew I had to be able to explain to them why the value is there, explain to them, what does quality even look like in these garments? And to do that, I knew I had to build a direct to consumer relationship, because throwing my product next to the penguin pajamas in Nordstrom wasn't really going to work. And so that's what I did. I went digital first, but over time, and like I said, acquiring customers on Facebook at that time was very doable. Over time, that landscape has changed. You still have to be able to profitably acquire customers, and so I can still do it, but not at the rate that I could do it before. Before I used to describe it almost like a lever, just how much money can you stick in the slot, and then just pull it as much as you want, and then you're going to get that much out in return. And that world's been changing in real time. So I think it's a good strategy in my mind to, one, be adaptive and flexible, but also be open to doing new models. So for us, I'm interested in wholesale in a way I wasn't really exploring before. And I'm interested in, brick and mortar. We are expanding our brick and mortar retail footprint. And to me, building a diversified strategy helps create also a kind of insurance where you don't have all your eggs in one basket.
So actually, as you're expanding into the brick and mortar and building more and more store, what we've seen is retailer face a challenge because their online team and their brick and mortar stores team, they generally are playing two different games and they are like two different teams. So having a good integration between them, being able to exchange the information, serve this customer, because your customer, what we know is that a customer hops between their phone, their computer, and their physical store visits multiple times before they make purchase and after they made the purchase. So having these, adding more and more distribution channels adds that complexity and increases the complexity really, really fast. So what do you think about it, and how do you plan to? What's your strategy to manage these different kind of complexities in business?
I think you nailed it right. This is adding a lot of challenge to the business. It's managing wholesale is one thing, DTC online is another, brick and mortar retail another. These are all very different channels. And I mean, it's even tricky when you think about it in terms of org. Where does this person sit? Do they sit under merchandising? Do they sit under marketing? Is it under operations? Truly, they work with all of these different divisions, and this is one of the challenges that we face. Um, and honestly, I think I've seen it under every single one of these people at different organizations. So I don't have the perfect answer here, but to say I see it being challenging across and I work with lots of businesses. I'm an investor and I'm invested in a number of different businesses. So I have this opportunity to kind of like get a look in. And what I'm seeing is a huge variety in the ways it's handled. And I don't know that it's perfectly handled. It's not perfectly handled at Lunya. I think there's definitely opportunities for us to kind of create a smoother experience because in the dream life, what is it to me? Dream life is almost from a psychological aspect. Shopping at Lunya online feels similar. It feels similar to how it feels in person. So that would be the level of brand execution that I need to pull off in order to have it be this kind of feeling, that it feels like it's got continuity to it. It's a level that we're not at right now, but I'm looking forward to getting at. And I think this is where the art is. This is where the brand importance and brand is. It's almost engineering it not just from an operational standpoint, but from a brand perspective and creating that kind of continuity. So um, I don't have an answer. I think that it's easy for retail folks to start to feel like they're getting marooned on an island. And so for us, we keep trying to figure out where the place is to put it in the org where it doesn't have that feel like it's happening. I do know for marketing, a big part of us was literally just adding it into every channel plan, making sure it's there, and starting to have merchandising, thinking about how does this product show up in the store? Is it folded? Is it hung? Is this even going to the store? And then thinking about the importance of newness in brick and mortar retail and thinking, do we need our new products to go in the store or can they not? And how are we going to handle it when we sell it online, but we're sitting on inventory in Atlanta? And are we creating fulfill from store? And so a lot of it is kind of like thinking through all these different scenarios and then working with the different teams. Like, I mean, we're just implementing fulfill in store. And that, as an example, is opening up a lot of opportunity for us because it means that we can send a full proper allocation to every store, have newness at every store, but not end up in the situation where I'm sitting on dead inventory in one location that while I'm sold out online. So again, these are those things where sometimes it's a marketing solve, sometimes it's an ops solve. It's really all about just good communication.
Yeah, in fact, I really like what you said. We may not know it today, but again, like the product development processes will develop. It's kind of like a rinse and repeat thing. So as you learn more, you can improve upon it. It's again iterative model where we continue to observe, continue to collect information, and improve our system so we can serve our customers good. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that answer, especially because you were saying, I don't necessarily know if right now it feels the same online as it does in store, and you were looking for that continuity and you think that's super important. I can think of very few retailers out there where I feel the same when I shop online as I do in store. So, just the fact that you're thinking about it, I think is great because it's that next level of brand that very few retailers are really able to achieve because they're so stuck in thinking about channels. So I think it's great that it's something that you're already thinking about internally. But I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk and ask for your opinion on fast fashion in particular. Brands like H&M, Zara, they're known to look at maybe more pricey brands and look at what they're doing, essentially copy their models, roll them out really quickly. So I wanted to just ask your thoughts on fast fashion, maybe retail sustainability, and that copycat trend that is really, really strong right now.
Oh, this is a landmine of an area to talk about. I'll tell you. So I'm going to tell you a funny story. But my mom used to tell me about how when she was in school, she would get like 3 new outfits a year. And actually, her mom was like an incredible seamstress. She could open Vogue, and then she would sew outfits that were like the outfits in Vogue, and she would wear them anyway. That would be, she'd have a handful of new outfits, and that would be what it was. And I think that, and the world has shifted around this too, and this is kind of what we're talking about is it. I think we like to hold all these businesses responsible for some of these things, but the reality is, in a capitalist economy, businesses solve problems that solve consumer need, and that the dynamics have shifted. So I think with the advent of social media and this ability to have really specialized manufacturing where you can drive costs down, we've created an environment where people their expectations have shifted drastically. I remember reading this really interesting article, and they were talking about how you'd think, women when they used to stay home and take care of the home, uh, they would wash clothing by hand, and then of course, as event technology progressed and they got a washing machine at home, we'd be like, oh, great, they're going to have all this free time. But what actually happened is their expectations adjusted. So, in the Middle Ages, you wash your clothes like a couple times a year, and then as the world shifted and we started to have washing machines at home, now you wash your clothes between every single use. So you have this shifting expectations that kind of that shape the world we live in. And so if I take all of that and I bring it back to the question you asked me, which is like, how do I feel about fast fashion? It's tricky because, I mean, there's no question it's bad for the world. It's not a positive thing for society. Just period, the end, right? It's not good for people. However, there's a lot of demand for it. And so how do I reconcile those two things? And I think we got to hit these things from all sides. I would say, on one hand, helping to educate people how bad fashion can be for the environment can be really helpful, because I think awareness can become a really great catalyst for change of behavior. And I think as behavior changes and customers if customers are willing to invest in things that last longer because they want to have fewer better things, I think that then that helps us a lot, because really there's no need. These fast fashion businesses can cut costs because they're not worried about quality or longevity, because you're wearing things almost single use. It's an Instagram picture and you're done with it. So I think there's this really interesting kind of dance that needs to go on, both on the business side and the consumer side, where we hold a bit of a shared responsibility for that kind of behavior. It's easier for us to point the finger at the businesses that are satisfying our need and blame them for it. But the reality is, like, it has to change on both sides. And I think the other thing that's tricky about this is clothing is one of the few industries that have had a massive amount of deflation over time. So your expectation on how much you spend on your clothing relative to what you would have spent it, like when my mom was a girl, like I was describing, is less, for share of total income. And so that's also really interesting. We've had to reset expectations on cost, whereas if you actually wanted to pay everybody well throughout the supply chain and create a quality product that lasts, you'd have to get comfortable spending more. And I know, as somebody who sells an expensive product, I spend a lot of time helping people understand, why should you spend this money on the product. I'm spending somewhere between $15 and $22 a yard on silk, spending a lot, but I actually am with a great fabric or factory that pays its people well. And, I kind of can walk people through it. And if you look at it, it's not like we're making big fluffy margins, here. There's not fashion is tight margin business. So this feels like I'm all over the place in some ways when I'm describing the answer to this question, but there isn't a silver bullet here. If H&M went out of business tomorrow, there'd be another one right there to fill its place, because the demand and the business is still there for people wanting this kind of problem solved. So I think really it actually starts with consumer behavior. Like, one of my favorite stories is, Walmart is one of the biggest purchasers of organic produce. I don't think we all know that, but I loved that fact. And the reason is, organic produce started as very niche, very high end, very sort of, Whole Foodsy, and this was Whole Foods before Amazon bought Whole Foods, but it was sort of like this luxury thing. And then as consumer demand increased, then Walmart started going, oh, I want organic food too, because the consumer demanded it. And so I think there's this really interesting thing around, how do we create different kinds of consumer behavior? And I think there's a lot of ways to hit this, but really at the end of the day, I think that's actually where a lot of this has to start.
No, I love that answer actually, and I like what you said about it's a shared responsibility because I think you may be one of the only retailers that we've asked this question that has said it's not only on the retailer, it's on the consumer, it's what the consumer wants, which actually isn't really a way that I think about it too much. So I think sustainability is a super important topic. I think most retailers should be thinking a little bit more about how they can approach it to be more sustainable at every point, even if it's a small change. But to your point, us as consumers, we like cheap products. So it's something that we need to make a change.
Yeah, it was created a lot of tension for me early on in the business where people would be loving to be all over my Facebook ads talking about how expensive my product is, and I'm like looking at my cost of goods and products and being like, where would I get more money? Like, how would I bring this down? And I'm like, I just can't. I have to own what I am. I'm a really high quality, like these products will last. I have silk that I've owned for a lot of years. And it's one thing to have longevity in your product if you're using a synthetic material. If you're like an athletic wear and you've got a nylon based product, that could last for a very, very long time. But doing it with natural fibers in fine weights, it's hard to do. It's a construction challenge, and it's also a fabric quality challenge. So I think across the board, I mean, and look, I also think the other thing I'm really excited about is no question us as businesses need to get better. But part of me just thinks that's the way of doing business now. Like, I don't see this as a marketing shtick anymore. It's like, yeah, you just need to do that. Like, even H&M is using some sustainable practices. Could they be better? Of course. But I do look at it and go, what we're all moving in that direction, and I'm happy to see that. That's consumer demand that's making us move in that direction, right? There's early on in my business, people would ask me about that, and I would struggle because I'm like, ooh, if I go do this, i.e., move to organic Pima, it's going to raise my cost of goods X percent. Will I be able to charge the customer that extra percent so I can still run a profitable business? And the answer was no at the beginning of my business. And now the answer is yes, because people understand, they're educated, and they're willing to pay for that. And so that's what I'm saying is like that. I think it's a combination of like the demand, and then I will need to rise my business practices to meet that demand. And I need to know that at the end of the day, I can still make a product that's sellable that I can make a profit on.
Yeah, and what I love about, this whole conversation is what you've essentially said is I love to listen to my customers. I provide a forum for them so I can listen to them, but I also stay true to what my brand represents. And I think that is such a fine line that many retailers are struggling with, especially if they're new. It's like, at what point do I cave and change because I'm getting pushback? And at what point is this actually my brand? And so I think, this podcast episode would be great for any digitally native brand or newer brand or expanding brands that are struggling with that, pushback, because it's important to have that brand identity. And I think you guys do it really well. I think we can leave it there with that great feedback from you. It's been great having you on and learning more about the brand. And we encourage our audience to check out lunya.co for some really luxe, great sleepwear. But before we end, Ashley, is there anything exciting going on in your life or in your brand that you'd like to update our audience on?
I would say check out Lago, LAHGO.co as well. It's our new men's line that we've come out with. We had a lot of guys being like, hello, what about us? So we've got you. Definitely check it out. It's really great. So we've got products for everybody.
I love it. Yeah, you can't leave them out. We can't be the only ones with great PJs. So I love that expansion. Definitely recommend to our audience to check that out. And thank you for joining us, Ashley.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ashley.
That's it for this episode of the Customer Centric Retailing Podcast featuring our special guest, Ashley Merrill. Ashley has an evolving, adaptive brand. She cares about customer feedback and strives to incorporate it within the product development cycle. Yet she's also learned that what differentiates great retailers from average ones is purpose and value. So she stays true to what her brand represents. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please rate and review and recommend to a friend or fellow retail fanatic. This podcast is brought to you by Hot Wax Commerce.